If you've watched the last video about problems like this, you'll recall that the first step is going to be to draw our triangle in a specific quadrant. This time they're asking us to draw the triangle between 270 degrees and 360 degrees. Well, that must be describing quadrant 4 down here. And again, if you need some refreshers, go back and watch the last video. I talk a little bit more about that. So in quadrant 4, I'll draw my right triangle. It's going to come off the origin and then connect straight to the x-axis. Always to the x-axis, never to the y-axis, and I'll put theta in there. The next part of this then is going to be to label the two sides of the triangle. And again, like we saw in the last video, we'll use this part of the problem to label the two sides. One thing I'm going to do, though, I don't like dealing with the reciprocals, so I'm just going to change this to the tangent of theta. And then that, of course, just means take a reciprocal, so I'll flip that into a 5 over 3 with a negative sign. And I purposely put that negative sign in the middle because we have to figure out which side is the negative side. Tangent, the TOA part of SOHCAHTOA, stands for the opposite over the adjacent. So one of those numbers is negative, but not both of them, but one of them is. So let's go ahead and label those, first of all, 5 and 3, and then we'll figure out which one's negative. So 5, there's my opposite side. My adjacent side is going to be 3. As far as which side is negative, it just comes down to thinking about coordinates and which direction are these sides going in. If I was graphing this, that's going to the right. That's definitely a positive value. However, this side is going down. In terms of coordinates, that's a negative value, and so I'm going to put the negative on that 5. Okay, and it does matter. It does matter where that negative goes, so make sure you're thinking about it. Basically, any side going to the left, as we discussed in the last video, or any side going down is going to have a negative sign on it. All right, so my triangle is drawn. Let's go ahead and find that missing side just like we did last time. It's the hypotenuse that's missing this time. So I'll call it x again, but you can call it whatever you want to call it. 3 squared plus, now notice I'm using parentheses. Like I said in the last video, you should always use parentheses. But if that number is negative, it especially is going to matter. 3 squared is 9. Negative 5 times itself is a positive 25. The reason the parentheses matter is if you don't use them, and happen to type in negative 5 squared in your calculator like that, you'll get a negative 25, and that is not what we're looking for. So 9 plus 25 has to be equal to x squared. I'll add those together and get 34 is x squared, and so when I take the square root, I don't want decimals, so I'm going to leave that as the square root of 34. Now, I do want you to go ahead and try to break that down and simplify it. Look for those pairs always. 34 doesn't, so I'll save you the trouble of doing that, but try that when you're doing your homework. So my missing side is then the square root of 34. Now, remember, we had also said sometimes you have to manually put on a negative sign onto the answers you get. Hypotenuse can never be negative. So if you're ever finding hypotenuse, it's never going to be negative. It's always going to be a positive value. Our triangle's drawn. All the sides are labeled. We can finally answer the question that we want to know. This time they were asking about the cosecant of theta. So again, I don't like dealing with the reciprocal. So in my head, I'm thinking, well, cosecant is just the reciprocal of sine. So I'm just going to kind of find the sine function upside down, sort of. So I know that sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So I just have to make sure I flip this one and get hypotenuse over opposite for cosecant. So the hypotenuse is the side we just found, the square root of 34. The opposite side we already had. The opposite side was that negative 5. So I'll throw that negative 5 on there. Once again, your final step is to see if you can simplify this. Since we already tried breaking down square root of 34 and couldn't do it, and since the square root's not on the bottom, we should be good to go with that answer. If you don't like seeing the negative sign on the bottom like that, of course, you could just go ahead and throw it in the middle, and that would be just fine as well.